Okay, so today I'm going to talk about one of my pet concepts lately that I haven't talked a lot about in the past, but I've mentioned it recently somewhat, is the attribution fallacy. And there's actually two things that it can mean. One thing that it can mean is one thing that it can mean is like the need to, well, it's kind of ties in, like the need to attribute everything to something. In other words, people can't think for themselves. They can't be objective. They can't just think. So the origin point of an idea or a thought or a behavior is always attributed to influence. This often happens in youth, where people are, to be fair, very suggestible and, easily influenced, but that's the issue, is it assumes that their other behavior, their normal behavior, quote unquote, is not also a reaction to indoctrination by parents, by society, etc. So it's not saying whether it's a good or bad thing, but it's like everything is reactive, not just some things, but some are just taken for granted once we are ingrained in our youth and indoctrinated and stuff. So what happens is there's this fallacy that's very clear, again, with that, or even with adults or anybody. If you break free of the norm in society, or any variance, anything different than what is common, it'll be attributed like, oh, you're only saying that because blank. You saw that, and like they'll try, even like what some of the stuff I discuss. That's one of my favorite funny lines that somebody said to me in a debate, in my old debate format. Like they said, I'm talking about a fallacy, like even how here I have in the title and stuff. These aren't like fallacies that are discussed by other people. These are mine from my own format. But like, I was discussing a particular one and I forgot what it was, but they said, oh, that's not even on the list of fallacies, like, ones that are established by other people and discussed in the past. So it's like, that in itself is a fallacy. Is like, so in other words, you can't present a new idea. All the ideas that are already presented, which at one point, how did it originate? Some random person just randomly thought about it, and they might have some stature or whatever, fame in a field, and we get it. Oftentimes that's a fallacy too, like age, like, oh, something's been around for a long time, therefore it's credible. Like holidays and traditions are like that, where if I tried to introduce a new holiday now, you'd say, oh, it's silly, or you would critically think about it, you might question it, you would point to me like, oh, it's just some random guy coming up with it. Well, that's how they all started, but because it happened a long time ago and because it's been going along for a long time, you go along with it. So it doesn't mean whether it's good or bad, it just means that same exact idea could be presented to you now, and you might think about it a little and say like, okay, I'm not sure if I'm going to do that, or why should I? You would at least critically think in a way that you otherwise don't do about things that are established. The same is true of religion, for example. Those same things, if they happened in the digital age, everybody had their iPhones out as Jesus is coming back to life, or whatever you want to point to, there might be more skepticism, but because it happened at a time without that accountability, now, right, people are more willing to accept it at least than they otherwise would be. Whereas, like, what are we heightened by today? We're like, there's always like this new age witch hunt thing of like, we criticize the new technology, like, oh, AI, it would be an AI fake video, that must be what it is. We always have that excuse or that cop out, like we're blaming the newest technology, but we're ignoring the current technology that at one point recently was new, that we're controlled by. So like, oh, iPhones and cameras and whatever, internet and stuff like that, that's fine. And again, it's not saying whether it is or isn't, but we take those things for granted, but they're very new to relative in human history. So we're controlled by one era of technology, but then we resist, right? Especially the older people, older generation, they resist it. They're like, oh no, this AI is bad and it's ruining society. But guess what? People said 20 years ago, oh, phones are going to ruin society, or computers are going to ruin society, or, so it's not a question of whether they do or not. It's a question of, you're just picking on the newest thing because it's new. If you really felt that way, you would trace it back and realize, oh, our whole life is like that anyway. So if you really wanted to do, okay, be a minimalist and don't use any technology, and that would be more appropriate, right? But you want to have it halfway. You just want to use the technology you're used to and reject that which you're not used to. So it's not really about the technology, right? So again, minimalism or some other accountable standard would be present there. But no, that's a very funny line. I wish I had some of these saved on video. Like, so so I'm pointing out some fallacy, and then the guy says, oh, that's not even an established fallacy. Like, so everything has to already be established, even though it's established by subjective human beings like me and like you, and, you know, there's some cult of personality, like, oh, it's some big name person that we know, but, you know, so in other words, a person cannot have an original idea. A person cannot just think and consider and observe something for the first time. And if you had that mentality, then that same thing that you're familiar with and is established would be undone, because then you'd be saying the same thing. I'm driving back from like Rochester to Syracuse, so like central upstate New York. How's it going? But basically, you know, they're not the best weather to be doing this either, but so again, people can't have original ideas, and so if you applied that same standard, hey Sigma, how's it going? If you applied that same standard, then when that idea originally was being discussed or had, you would question that too. You'd say, oh, who's this random guy discussing this random idea? And it's like, you know, you would have said the same thing. And so whatever allowed, oh my God, whatever allowed that to, yeah, unfortunately. It kind of just started. It wasn't like this earlier in the day, but right, so you would question their credibility, attack them, or attribute something there too. So just because it's out of sight, out of mind, far removed, already preconceived, understand. Imagine if let's not imagine that. I've never crashed, I've never gotten a ticket in my life, so I've been pulled over by cops, but it's actually funny, like every time it's genuinely not my fault. I wish I would have had it on like dash cam or something. Like they're just mad. There's this one, there's a big storm and trees are falling down and stuff, and she's just mad and letting off steam, and so she pulls me over like, you shouldn't be out driving in this weather. It's like, dude, that was pretty funny. I'm going back to Syracuse, so Syracuse is like right smack dab in the middle of New York. So okay, so what I was saying is, yeah, you would question the origin point there, and you would also, so we treat things as like sort of sacred and established just because it's preconceived, it's been there for a long time, right? So you don't question it, so it couldn't apply to anything. I just give them donuts. Yeah, I got to carry donuts with me at all times. But so that's one aspect of it. The other aspect, so again, you're always trying to attribute if it's not already something well known or established, and part of that is what I call ignorance insistence, kind of, where people again define value by, hey Gro, how's it going? People define value by themselves, right? The non-basic self. It's not very credible. It means like what you're familiar with, what's closest to you, what you're, you know, it's basically about you. It's not really about a standard or a criteria. And so what that means is, right, it's sort of arbitrary. Like, oh, you take pride in your country because you happen to be born there. You take pride in your family because you didn't choose your family. Like, so all these things that you value doesn't mean they're bad, but it means you're just valuing them because of their proximity to you, their relation to you, not really based on any objective standard or criteria. So one of the things with that is, look at how bumpy some of these roads are too. But the point is that if you, how do I say it? Based on proximity to you, so like your ignorance too, like what you're, you know, an individual human being only knows a fraction of everything that humanity collectively knows, and then humanity collectively only knows a fraction of everything, you know, perceivably that we could ever know or discover. So you're insisting about that little fraction, and things like, you know, newness will be valued, like, oh, this movie just came out, so you'll watch that, instead of, you know, some older movie, you'll say, oh, that's old, so why would I watch it? But like, if you haven't seen it, it's new to you. I always would say that. Or even kind of like, something is not more or less valuable just because you're familiar or not familiar with it, right? And if you use that criteria, it's the same thing. Like, you've heard of that before, therefore you'll give it a chance or it's good. You haven't heard of it, therefore it's bad. But if that is how everybody thought, then you would never hear about anything, because nobody would ever give anything a chance, because nobody would have ever heard of anything, right? Somebody has to first do it to have you hear about it. And the problem here is the curation fallacy of like that false absolute default state that I was talking about before, of like, you know, people, what is considered normal in society. First of all, whatever is considered normal isn't in itself credible just for that reason, right? At one point in history, it was normal to, World War II Germany, certain things were normal. China right now, certain things are normal. That doesn't make them good, right? But the second part of that is even the way that the norm is set up and established is more like, you're both exposed to the same indoctrination or, contrivance by society. So therefore that creates the norm, the outcome. So like you're being influenced by certain things, and that leads to the outcome. It's not something you're just doing naturally on your own. So that's what you have to be careful about with the norm fallacy too. Even if we were to treat that as credible, which in itself it's really not. The fact is it's a curated normalcy. It's not like, human beings are born and they normally behave the exact way that you do when you're an adult. No, they don't. They're indoctrinated by parents, by school, by teachers, by society, by government, by media. So after all that, yes, it's normal after exposure to all those same influences to then behave a certain way. Whether that's good or bad or not isn't the question, right? That's what creates it. So it's a curated outcome. So why would you insist upon a curated outcome? You can choose for yourself what I call self-actualizing from an inherent-based state. And then the other aspect is that, so again, we'll try to attribute everything to an influence. So you'll say, these kids are behaving a certain way because they're influenced by something, right? At one point in history it was comic books, now it'd be video games, it'd be something else, right? Some book you read, some movie you saw, right? And I'm not saying that can't be true to some extent. Certainly for children, they can be easily impressionable and whatever. But the point is that that's also true of the way they behave normally compared to this supposed deviant behavior, variant behavior that you're criticizing. The way that they normally behave also isn't natural. They're only behaving that way because you raised them that way, because you trained them that way, because you conditioned them that way. So it doesn't mean it's good or bad. But when you do that attribution, do it all the way then. They only normally behave that way because we make them, because we force them to, basically, right? So now they're finally being influenced by something else, and now they're choosing something different, right? So it's kind of like a false choice that if somebody had the choice, maybe they'd live out in the woods and sleep on the ground or something. But society kind of forces and pressures something else. And so the point with the attribution fallacy, though, is and again, people can't have original ideas. So what I'm discussing now, people would try to attribute, right? Is why can't I just objectively think and observe that thing the same way that people could have done in the past, the same way that, about other things? It seems like an alien notion to people to actually just think and observe and be objective, right? It always has to be it must be Carl Jung or it must be Sigmund Freud or something. You gotta always attribute it to some celebrity, cult of personality, some famous person, or you have to attribute it. This is one of my favorite ways to describe it, is and again, I'm not saying there can't be similarities in what you're discussing, but that doesn't mean that person takes ownership of it, or any time discussing it from that point on is always attributed to them, and it doesn't matter about them, right? Even at the time, focus on the idea, not the individual. It really doesn't matter, right, who said something. Right? To personalize ideas and thoughts is kind of stupid because anybody can think and consider anything. So, right, it's not like a contest, but this or even the insignificant details kind of thing as a time, or whatever, you reject functional basis. So it's not that you can't do something, it's that you choose what really to value, so you don't care about mundane everyday things too much, and you focus instead on thinking or something about the larger process instead of the initial zero-sum basis. You treat it as a nuisance, try to remove the need, absolutist kind of phrasing. But the other thing is it's basically the fact that, again, attributing to influence. Now I'll do the folly favoritism side of it, where entertainment, escapism, movie, TV, game, show, whatever, book, right? It's you're saying all that now because you've been reading this book by this famous author and that's why you're saying it. Like, it doesn't matter, even if that was the case. It's like, it's an idea that a person can think or observe, or a reality or a truth or something. So like, why does the source matter at that point? Like, the reason why you're thinking it or observing it is because it's something that a human being can think and can observe. Right now, might be prompted by something, some influence, but right, that's still part of the totality of your ability to think anyway. You could have thought that on your own. You could have thought something else, anything else. Like, it's like comparing to this false absolute normative basis of like, you know, false duality of the normal or the mediocre mass collective basis, and then anything that deviates from that is outward, so it has to be attributed. Like, oh, you're only thinking that because of such and such influence of, oh, you read it in a book or you heard it somewhere, but oh, you're only a normie, you're only doing the normal collective mass thing because you've been indoctrinated to it and reinforced, and you know, how you're raised, how you're influenced by media. So those things go non-accountable. So if you're going to attribute influences, then do it all the way, like with everything. So then, oh, a mass of people are only behaving that way because that makes them easier to control, and it's a lowest common denominator fallacy. It doesn't mean it has any credibility. It means that's how people are controlled, not how they would really want to be, or their potential, or what, you know, highest standard. Everything mass-produced suffers inequality for it, one of my key phrases. So what you need to understand is that basically, when you say, like, to escapism, like freedom or self-actualization, or the human variable, as I call it, is often attributed to fiction, which can be really disheartening, because you see that, and like you're doing something and then they'll attribute it to a character or like a show, and it's actually really funny to see this. So like, you're like really motivated, or you're like really, you know, a different kind of person than the average person, right? And they'll attribute it like, oh, like, bro, you know, you could use it in this Gen Z slang too, like, bro thinks he's Elon Musk, or bro thinks he's this guy, right? So the point is that you have to attribute that. You can't just see, oh no, this person is choosing to do something of their own free will, they're motivated, they have a certain goal, they're self-actualizing, right? That can't happen. It must be, oh, we're going to attribute it to something else that we're familiar with, which again often comes from fiction, because there's more truth in fiction than there is in reality. There's more freedom in fiction. So like, that serves as a placeholder, because everything of actual value or impact in life is otherwise controlled. And so it's kind of like, you know, just, I'm trying to think of a very specific example, like a movie or something. They'll attribute something to a character in a story because they can't see that in real life. Like, oh, we're not allowed to do that. We can't do that freely, right? Nobody would ever do that. And so now somebody does it, and instead of seeing that, oh, look, this human being is self-actualizing and doing something, we're going to attribute it and say, oh, hey, that's like that scene from that movie. Hey, that's like that character from that show. Like, that's what they see in it, rather than, oh, this is something that people are capable of doing. This is what free will looks like. This is what our potential looks like. Maybe I can do that too. Maybe I can do something other than the norm, right? So that's kind of a sad commentary, that you have to attribute human freedom and variable and self-actualization to a label to try to discredit them. Oh, they're only doing that thing, which human beings are capable of doing, but we don't accept in our false absolute, false duality, you know, normative basis. They're only doing it because they're this blank label. It couldn't be self-actualizing choice, deliberate, right? They can't, you know, you don't have free will. You can't choose. It must be, oh, you don't know any better. You're this label, right? How we weaponize psychology and medicine and stuff. Or, oh, it must be attributed to this influence. Oh, they're only doing it because they were influenced by this magazine, this show, this comic book. And oh, it's, again, not that you could choose to do that on your own. Not that you could choose even to be influenced by that thing. Be more open-minded and consider sources, other things. And then not that you could, again, simply be self-aware and then choose. It must be emperor has no clothes fallacy, that, oh, if you don't go along with the false absolute norm mass basis, it must be that you it must be that you don't know any better, right? Because it's, again, false absolute that everybody has to do and without thinking and so on. So, right, again, so you'll be labeled like you don't know any better. You'll be attributed to something like an influence that made you do that. Not that you couldn't choose that on your own or think about it, or the fact that you even chose to be influenced by that thing, the fact that that appealed to you, gravitated towards you, right, would be telling. It's kind of like, oh, you think that because you watch Fox News or something like that, people will say, but then why do you watch Fox News, right? Maybe because it reinforces what you already think, maybe that's what you want to hear, right? Maybe, so like, is it because you're watching Fox News that you think that, or is it because you think that you're watching Fox News, right? Which one is really the influence there? And then the final point is with fiction, any sort of freedom or self-actualization or variance from a false absolute norm would be attributed as follows: that, oh, it's like they think they're in a movie, like main character syndrome. They think they have main character syndrome, or they're like that character from that movie or that show. Because again, they can't observe in reality a human being self-actualizing and just choosing to do something or doing something different than the norm. That's not possible. You're not allowed to do that. So therefore, oh, they're just imitating a movie where they are allowed to do that, because in our lives we're not allowed to do that. Like, not that you can simply be self-aware and self-actualize and choose that. So when I talk about let me try to explain it once more. It's a pretty good concept, but it's a little tricky to explain. Like, again, anytime you observe something, that's often people's default go-to response, especially in the modern day. You can't see that people could just do that on their own or do that anytime. So you're laboring under this false definition of what people are or what they can do. And so that means that basically, right, when you see something that anybody can do anytime, you don't see that. You instinctive gratification and subversive state by the same standards, often using a pretense of like, oh, you're sacrificing that ability for the collective, but not amalgam theory, by the way. So what else can I discuss here? Like the strain of objectivity thing I had discussed before, like basically, that it makes everyday life difficult or something like that, that you would be, like much of what people do, like social contrivance or overcompensations, distractions, right, bread and circuses type of thing, is just to cope with the contrivance state that they're in, which kind of tells you, oh, they wouldn't be at peace with it if they thought about it. So like, are you interested in just reinforcing and being at peace with that, or like, distracting yourself from that contrivance state, or are you interested in actual truth and objectivity and reality that you would try to see despite that, right? I like how when I decide to do this, the weather has to be this bad. So I posted a battle simulation video, but that guy's channel went down. I did it in collaboration with this guy Simbupi, who had like 20k subscribers, and he posts these little battle simulation things. This is what my short stories have been reduced to. So it's the Absolutist King that I talk about, and the Stimuli Acme. Rather than character names, I'm giving them like their titles basically. But like we got in battle simulation form. This is what we have to do to appeal to a lowest common denominator. But what it means is that, yeah, unfortunately his channel went down, which is kind of crazy. I don't know for what exactly. All he does is post battle simulation videos where he makes like these physics-based things, unless it's to imply that he stole it from somebody else. But yeah, I had him make that one, and so I was trying to almost do that where I could sort of retell some of my short stories in that form, because I don't have a budget to do like a big animated film or something, obviously, about it. So I'll just do these stupid battle simulation things. That title is pretty funny, just using their sort of code names or their titles rather than the actual name of the character. But again, nobody knows really what this material is in the first place, so yeah, that's a good concept. Let me try to describe it from one other angle here. Like, everything, people try to attribute everything to some influence, some external factor, you know, again, to imply that people don't have free will, they can't think for themselves, they couldn't possibly choose something on their own, right? And so everything has to be like explained away, and the real point of it isn't anything wrong with that person or what they're doing necessarily. It's more just the cognitive dissonance of the people controlled in a society have to attack anything different, right? So you see this because it makes them question their own state and realize it's not absolute. It happens a lot with open relationships. I love this moment of, like, Destiny was in an open relationship with Melina, right? And then they break up, right? And, like, for years they were together, you know, things were good, whatever. And then, so that doesn't validate open relationships. Then they break up. One single person that you know in an open relationship breaks up, and you say, oh, look at this. That proves open relationships don't work. Meanwhile, over 50% of marriages end in divorce. So it's like, that doesn't discredit them, but one highly conspicuous celebrity doing something else, right, not working out, discredits that. So it's kind of the fallacy of, so what, if whenever celebrities get divorced, that doesn't discredit it? So it shows you like an internal bias in that you're kind of indoctrinated mindlessly to, you know, to go along with something no matter what, regardless, right? Like, the truth doesn't matter to contrivance. It has its own agenda. You've already been indoctrinated by it, right? So the truth doesn't matter. You just go along with it. And then one of the other things I was going to discuss is the fact that, you know, never mind the folly attribution aspect. What about the fact that why does entertainment and escapism appeal to people in the first place? Like, you might think, oh, it's just a normal part of life, but why? Like, you know, even I say the same thing with comedy and humor. There's nothing more than cognitive dissonance, like, of you coping with your contrivance state of, like, oh, a false absolute that you've been indoctrinated into believing and living by, but then you constantly see signs that it's not absolute, so now you laugh it off and turn that into comedy. So again, it has like a deeper psychological meaning, but you just take it at face value. Same thing with entertainment, like, oh, you're just having fun, you're just playing this game. But if you truly valued your life in this finite zero-sum existence, you wouldn't spend your time on something that has no impact on your life or your state or anything. Right, and serves as nothing but distraction, right? So it would hurt your credibility. Why would you do this subversive thing that has no value, that has no impact? You can say, oh, a psychological impact, but the problem is that, so it indicates that, but it also indicates, so it indicates a non-value subversive state that you're doing something that has no impact, which shows you're in a controlled, kind of monopolized society, but also it shows you that you know, just you're in a situation where, like, along the way too, like with any influence, you think like reality, this is an attempt at that or a pretense of that, but with like the little, whether it's unintentional, whether it does have an ulterior motive, but like people's influence and subjective bias and incentives come in. How exactly it's described, but like it's like a game of telephone. At some point people are going to mishear something, or even if you take it seriously, or they're going to omit something, miswrite something, or they're going to, you know, misinterpret something, they're going to have ulterior motives and manipulate something. So like that part is the problem, because like people want to believe it's an absolute, but then they don't think about the process. Like nothing is absolute. People are always making mistakes. Or again, having ulterior motives and such. But the one other point is, again, why does it appeal? And it's kind of like, you know, it's a coping mechanism. So on one hand, it shows you're in a non-value subversive state, but also shows you a coping mechanism, like, oh, you have to distract yourself from the cognitive dissonance associated with your contrivance state, which means that you're not at peace with it, but you have to distract yourself rather than think about it. Right, you can't just think about it or face it or fully value it or self-actualize. So because you're in that subversive state, like a trained animal, you have to distract yourself. But yet we treat it like normal. But if we pretend we're aliens, right, looking from the outside, looking in, and be objective for once, and you know, you would basically just see, like, oh, look at this animal being distracted by a TV or something, like training themselves. They're doing that because they're not at peace with their own contrivance state, and they've been indoctrinated and they're controlled. But that's how they cope with it. And you know, they're not at peace, they're not at their full potential, so they have to cope with that, and they'll even do the work themselves and like falsely desire it, right? You make the act of coping with contrivance seem like your own idea or seem like something you actually want. Like, you get to choose. Oh, that's the freedom you have. You get to choose how you distract yourself from the contrivance state. Right? You get to choose how you overcompensate, all of that. Let's see, what are some of the other concepts I can discuss here? Just the fact that, you know, making people aware of the nature of a process is always a bad thing. Right, the awareness is negative. Kind of like the lack of overcompensation. It's your fault, not the fault of the process. Even if it's the same process at work, so it comes out to subjective human reinforcement. The problem is that would sort of apply to anything then. And the reason why is because that would apply to anything, and the reason why is because you would be reinforcing a state no matter what that state is uncritically. And it comes down to, again, it is like the apprehensive close fallacy that, you know, it's your inability to cope with the contrivance or overcompensate for the contrivance, or you broke the illusion of the contrivance. So it comes down to you, like, oh, it's your fault, you just can't handle it, you're just entitled, you're just, you know, whatever. But that's assuming that it's absolute, and you would want to do that, not that you can choose anything else, not that it's flawed, not that it's imperfect. And part of the point and the conclusion of some of these discussions isn't whether you should or shouldn't do something. It's more that you should question it, you should be objective, you should think, you should, you know, hold it accountable actively always, instead of treating it like it's absolute and take it for granted, right? So it's not specifically saying, oh, it's bad and you shouldn't do it, but it's also not going along with the false absolute, like, oh, it's absolute and you shouldn't even think about it or question it. Right, which is how people treat it. Everything is conditional, so it's kind of like, okay, you'll put up with this, you'll tolerate it for this outcome, for this end goal, but then people are trained in society to kind of desire it. Like, oh no, you actually want that, or you take gratification from that. You take pride in that, even though it's a zero-sum process, not based on self-interest. Look at these roads, man. That in itself is a real-life rumble feature, as I call it. Some of it is just unbelievable. Or in that sense, like, I like the layers to that. Like, you'll pay taxes, but then that's not enough for the roads. And oh, you also have to pay tolls for the throughway. And then oh, you also have to pay something else. Like, you know, you're already paying that, but it's like that's not enough or what? Okay, I'm done.